Nobody could handle the billionaire's daughter, not the 7 therapists who tried and failed, not the 2 elite conservatories that expelled her after she destroyed their pianos with her bare hands, not the security guards now restraining her as she screams in the center of San Francisco's most prestigious opera house, a music stand raised like a weapon aimed at her own mother. The chandelier light catches the crystal tears streaming down the girl's face. The orchestra has scattered. Donors and critics watch from the shadows, frozen between horror and fascination. Her mother, a billionaire arts patron in Hermes and heels, stands perfectly still, her face a mask of public humiliation. And then a janitor walks into the theater. He's a tall black man in his 40s, dark brown skin, silver threading through his locks, wearing a custodian's uniform that smells faintly of floor polish. His hands hang loose at his sides, long fingers, graceful in a way that doesn't match the mop bucket he left in the corridor. The security guards tighten their grip on the girl. She's still screaming that she wants to die, that she'll burn this place down. The janitor says 4 words. "Let her go, please." His voice is quiet, controlled. The kind of calm that doesn't come from training. It comes from surviving something catastrophic and learning to breathe through it. The billionaire wheels on him. Her voice cuts across the theater like broken glass. "You clean floors. My daughter is a prodigy. Don't confuse your life with hers." Every person in that room watches this black man in a janitor's uniform absorb public degradation without flinching. But here's what they don't see. The way he moves toward the girl with a conductor's precision. The way he kneels at eye level and waits, not with a worker's deference, but with a master's patience. The way his breathing shifts into a rhythm, 4 counts in and 4 counts out, and the girl's screaming stops. Just stops. She stares at him, whispers, "Who are you?" And in that moment, everyone in the Bellamy Opera House is asking the same question. If you believe that the people we overlook are sometimes the ones who see us most clearly, stay with this story, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about power, humility, and what it means to save someone when you're barely holding yourself together. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of what you do for a living? But to understand how a janitor became the only person who could reach an unreachable girl, we need to go back 6 weeks, to the day a quiet man stood in an opera house corridor, listening to music he could no longer bear to make. The floor buffer hummed in Julian's hands as he guided it across the marble corridor. Back and forth, steady rhythm. The machine's vibration traveled through his arms the way it did every evening, familiar and grounding. He was a tall black man in his mid-40s, with silver threading through his locks, tied back with a rubber band he'd found in the supply closet. His dark brown skin caught the warm light from the crystal sconces lining the hallway. His hands were long-fingered and graceful, too refined for the industrial equipment he operated. The Bellamy Opera House stretched around him in all its grand excess. Gold leaf on the ceiling, red velvet curtains in the theater wings, marble imported from somewhere expensive. Julian had cleaned every inch of it over the past 9 years and knew its corners better than the people who performed here. From the main theater, he heard violins warming up. Brahms. He paused mid-stroke and tilted his head, listening. The second violin was flat. Just a hair. Most people wouldn't notice. Julian noticed. He started buffing again before anyone saw him standing idle. Another custodian passed him in the corridor, an older Filipina woman named Rosa, who always smelled like lemon cleaner. She nodded, he nodded back. They didn't talk much. The work didn't require it. And an orchestra member emerged from a practice room, violin case under his arm, sheet music tucked against his chest. Young guy, white, expensive haircut. He walked past Julian without looking at him. The sheet music slipped from under his arm and scattered across the freshly buffed floor. Julian turned off the buffer, knelt down, gathered the pages carefully so they stayed in order. He stood and held them out. The violinist took them without a word. Didn't say thank you. Didn't make eye contact. Just took the music and kept walking, like Julian was a coat rack that happened to pick things up. Julian watched him disappear around the corner. Then he turned the buffer back on and kept working. He finished his shift at 6, punched out in the basement timekeeper room where the lockers smelled like old coffee and someone's leftover lunch, and changed out of his work shirt into a plain black hoodie, walked out the service entrance into the San Francisco evening. The Fillmore district was a 20-minute walk. Julian liked walking, gave him time to let the opera house fall away before he got home. The streets here were different from the polished downtown blocks around the Bellamy. Murals on the buildings, corner stores with signs in 3 languages, people sitting on stoops talking and laughing, music drifting from open windows. Julian passed the soul food restaurant on the ground floor of his building. The owner, a broad-shouldered black man named Marcus, was wiping down tables inside. Marcus looked up and grinned through the window, pointed at Julian, mouthed something about working too hard. Julian smiled and waved him off. He climbed the narrow stairs to the 2nd floor, unlocked the apartment door. Inside, everything was small and worn but clean. Kitchen table with 2 mismatched chairs, a couch someone had left on the curb that Julian reupholstered himself. Naya's school artwork taped to the refrigerator. He picked up Naya from the after-school program 3 blocks away. She was 12, all legs and elbows, with her hair in 2 puffs and her backpack dragging on the ground. "Hey, baby," he said. "Hey, Dad." They walked home together. She told him about a test she'd aced in math and a girl in her class who was being mean to everyone. Julian listened and asked questions and let her talk. Dinner was simple: chicken and rice, green beans from a can. They ate at the small table while the evening light slanted through the window. After dinner, Naya got out her violin. It was a rental from school. Nothing fancy, but she treated it like it was made of glass. She played scales first, then a piece she was learning for her spring recital. Vivaldi. Julian sat on the couch and listened. His chest tightened the way it always did when she played. She had talent, real talent, the kind that couldn't be taught. She finished and looked at him. "Was that better?" "Much better," he said. "Your bow arm is smoother." She tilted her head. "How do you always know what's wrong?" "I just listen." "But you know things my teacher doesn't know. Like last week when you told me I was rushing the 16th notes and she didn't even notice." Julian kept his face neutral. "I've heard a lot of music, that's all." Naya set the violin down in its case. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is it weird that you're a janitor, but you know more about music than anyone I've ever met?" The question wasn't new. She'd asked versions of it before. Each time, Julian felt the weight of everything he wasn't telling her press against his ribs. "I just listen a lot, baby," he said gently. She looked at him with those eyes that saw too much, eyes like her mother's. She didn't push. She never did. But her expression said she knew he was hiding something. She kissed him goodnight and went to her room. Julian stayed on the couch. The apartment was quiet except for the muffled sound of the city outside. He stood and walked to the window, looked out over the neighborhood toward the glow of downtown. Somewhere in that light, the Bellamy Opera House stood with its crystal chandeliers and its grand stage, and its audiences full of people who looked through him like he was invisible. He pressed his palm against the glass. 13 years ago, he'd stood on stages like that in front of audiences like that, and they'd risen to their feet when he took a bow. Now he mopped the floors they walked on, and every single day, he told himself it was better this way. The next afternoon, Julian was buffing the lobby floors when he heard the piano. Rachmaninoff, Third Concerto, difficult piece. He paused and listened through the half-open theater doors. The notes were technically correct, but the rhythm was wrong, rushed, panicked, like someone running from something they couldn't escape. A woman's voice cut through the music, sharp and cold. "Stop!" Again from measure 47. The piano stopped, started again. Same passage, same rushed tempo. "No, wrong! You're dragging on the triplets. Again!" Julian kept the buffer moving, but his attention was inside that theater. He recognized control when he heard it, the kind that squeezed until something broke. The piano stopped and started 3 more times. Each attempt worse than the last. "Madame Laurent, perhaps we should take a break." A man's voice, reasonable, diplomatic. "We'll take a break when she gets it right." Julian turned off the buffer, set it against the wall, walked closer to the doors. Through the gap, he could see the stage, a white grand piano under the lights, a girl at the keyboard, 17, maybe 18, dark hair pulled back, shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. In the audience sat a woman in her late 50s. Expensive suit, perfect posture. She sat flanked by two younger people holding clipboards and tablets. The conductor stood on the podium looking uncomfortable. The orchestra members sat with their instruments, some staring at their music, others watching the girl with something like pity. Two men in dark suits stood at the sides of the theater. Security. Julian had seen them around the building before. From the top of the second movement, the woman said, and this time, Margot, try to remember that you've supposedly been training for this your entire life. The girl's hands shook as she placed them on the keys. She began playing, made it through 8 measures before her fingers stumbled. She stopped. Her breath came quick and shallow. Don't stop, the woman said. The girl started again. Her hands were trembling now, visible even from where Julian stood. Madame Laurent, she's clearly struggling, the conductor said. Perhaps you should focus on conducting and let me handle my daughter. The conductor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. One of the clipboard holders leaned toward the woman and whispered something. The woman waved her off without looking. Margot, I've invested $7 million in your training. 7 different therapists. 2 conservatories before they asked you to leave. 3 hospitalizations. Do you have any idea what this concert means? What people are expecting? The girl's hands dropped from the keys. Her shoulders started shaking. I can't, she whispered. Excuse me? I can't do this. You can and you will. The woman stood. Her voice carried across the theater like a judge delivering a sentence. Again, from measure 47. I didn't invest millions in your training for you to embarrass me in front of every critic and donor in this city. The girl put her hands back on the keys. They were shaking so badly now that Julian could see it from the lobby. She played 4 notes, then stopped. Something in her posture changed. Her shoulders went rigid. Her breathing shifted. Then she screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw sound of rage and desperation that echoed through the theater. She slammed the piano lid down, raised it, slammed it again. The crash of wood on wood reverberated like gunshots. The orchestra members jumped up. Some of them backed away. Others just stood frozen. The girl stood up so fast the piano bench fell over. She grabbed the music stand on top of the piano and raised it over her head like a weapon. She ran down the stage steps toward her mother. The 2 security guards moved fast. They caught her before she reached the seats. One grabbed the music stand. The other wrapped his arms around her from behind. She fought them, thrashing and kicking and screaming words now. Words about dying, about hating everyone, about burning the building down before she'd ever perform on that stage. The mother stood perfectly still. Her face was pale, shocked, horrified. The conductor backed away from the podium. Orchestra members were fleeing through the side exits. Someone dropped their instrument. The crash added to the chaos. The girl was still screaming, still fighting. The guards held her, but she wasn't stopping. Her voice was raw, broken, the sound of someone who'd been pushed past every limit. Julian's hands tightened on the doorframe. He'd seen this before. Not the exact scenario, but the shape of it. A person in crisis. A system trying to contain them with force. Everyone around them frozen between fear and not wanting to get involved. The girl's screaming shifted to sobbing, but she didn't stop fighting. The mother finally spoke. Get her under control. One of the guards looked at the other. Ma'am, we're not authorized to. I don't care what you're authorized to do. Control her. They tightened their grip. The girl screamed louder. Julian looked at the scene. The girl being held by 2 men twice her size. The mother standing there giving orders. The empty orchestra pit. The abandoned instruments. He looked down at his custodian uniform, at his hands that had once conducted orchestras in front of thousands. He thought about Naya's question from last night. Oh, about being invisible. About running from who he used to be. Then he thought about this girl, 17 years old and screaming that she wanted to die while her mother worried about embarrassment. Julian took a breath. Let it out slow. Then he walked through the theater doors. Julian's footsteps echoed across the theater floor. Every eye turned toward him, the tall black man in the custodian uniform walking down the aisle like he belonged there. The 2 security guards still had the girl. She was still fighting. still screaming. Julian spoke quietly, just loud enough to be heard. "Let her go. You're making it worse." The guards looked at each other, then at the woman in the expensive suit. She opened her mouth to speak, but Julian was already moving past them. He walked toward the stage with his hands visible at his sides, non-threatening. Calm. He climbed the stage steps. The girl was on her knees now between the two men. Her face was red and streaked with tears. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Julian knelt down, got to her eye level. Then he did something no one expected. He waited, didn't speak, didn't reach for her. Just knelt there in his work uniform with his long, graceful fingers resting loose on his knees and waited for her to see him. The girl's screaming tapered to sobs. Her thrashing slowed. She looked at him, really looked at him. Her eyes were wild and desperate and searching for something she didn't have words for. Julian held her gaze. His face was calm, patient, like he had all the time in the world. Then he spoke so quietly that only she could hear. "I know what it feels like when music becomes a prison. You don't have to be here. Janitor, you're allowed to say no." The girl stopped moving, completely still. Her breath caught. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who lost music the same way you're losing it." Something broke in her face. The anger collapsed into grief. She started crying. Not screaming anymore, just crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. The security guards loosened their grip, stepped back. They looked confused, uncertain. The girl folded forward. Her forehead almost touched the stage floor. Julian stayed where he was, kneeling, quiet, present. The theater was silent except for the sound of her crying. Everyone stood frozen, the conductor on his podium, the orchestra members scattered in the wings, the woman's assistants with their clipboards, the critics in their seats. Then the woman's voice cut through the silence. "Who are you?" Her accent was sharp, French, controlled. "What do you think you're doing?" Julian stood slowly, turned to face her. His dark brown skin caught the stage lights. His locks were still tied back with that rubber band. "Helping," he said. "You're a janitor." She said it like an accusation. "This is a private rehearsal. You have no business being in this theater." Julian said nothing. The woman walked closer. Her heels clicked on the floor. She looked him up and down, taking in the uniform, the work boots, the name tag that said his first name only. "Do you have any idea who my daughter is? What's at stake here?" "I know she's in pain," Julian said quietly. "She's being difficult. There's a difference." Julian looked at the girl still crying on the stage floor, then back at the woman. "Narsha, she's 17 years old and she just told you she can't do this. That's not being difficult. That's asking for help." The woman's face went cold. "And you think you're qualified to provide that help? You clean floors. My daughter's a prodigy. She's been training since she was 4 years old. Don't confuse your life with hers." The conductor cleared his throat. "Madame Laurent, perhaps. Stay out of this, Bernard." She stepped closer to Julian, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Expensive, heavy. "Someone in your position couldn't possibly understand what it takes to raise an elite musician. The sacrifices, the discipline, the standards that must be maintained." Julian held her gaze, said nothing. "You're overstepping, dramatically." Her voice carried across the theater. Everyone was listening. Everyone was watching. "I suggest you return to whatever floor you were buffing and forget this incident ever happened." Behind them, the girl had stopped crying. She was sitting up now, watching. Julian started to speak, stopped, tried again. "She doesn't need more discipline. She needs, I don't recall asking for your opinion on how to parent my child." The silence that followed was heavy. Julian felt the weight of every eye in the room, the orchestra members, the critics, the assistants, all of them watching a black man in a custodian uniform being dressed down by a billionaire in front of a crowd. He knew that look in their eyes. He'd seen it before. The way people look past you when you're wearing the wrong uniform, when you're standing in the wrong place, when you're the wrong color in the wrong room. Then a voice broke the silence. I want him to stay." The girl. She'd stood up. Her face was still wet with tears. Her hands were shaking. but her voice was clear. What? The woman turned. I want him to stay. He's the only one who's told me the truth. The woman's jaw tightened. She looked at her daughter, at Julian, at the conductor and the scattered orchestra and the witnesses to this disaster. Julian could see her calculating, weighing options, making decisions. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was different now, controlled, businesslike. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. You seem to have a calming effect on Margot. I'm willing to pay you to serve as her musical companion. Double your janitorial salary. You'll help keep her stable through the concert. 6 weeks. That's all I need. Julian shook his head. I don't want money. Everyone wants money. I'll talk to her if it helps. During my breaks. But I won't take payment for it. And I won't make her do anything she doesn't want to do. The woman's eyes narrowed. The goal is for her to perform. That's non-negotiable. The goal should be for her to be okay. They stared at each other. Two people with completely different understandings of what mattered. The woman broke first. Fine. You'll meet with her on your breaks. You'll help manage her emotional state. And when she performs in 6 weeks, you'll be nowhere near this theater. Understood? If she chooses to perform, Julian said. When? If. The woman's smile was cold. We'll see. 20 minutes later, Julian sat across from the girl in a small practice room, the kind used for warming up. No windows, just a piano and 2 chairs and walls covered in soundproofing. The girl was quiet now, exhausted. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself. So Julian didn't try to make her talk, just sat there, patient, like he had all the time in the world. Outside the room's small window, he could see the woman, the mother, Vivienne Laurent. She stood in the corridor watching them. Her face was unreadable, but her posture was tense. Julian looked back at the girl. She was watching him too, like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. Why did you help me? She whispered. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said something he hadn't planned to say. Because nobody should have to perform when they're broken. The girl's eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't look away. And through the window, Vivienne Laurent watched with the expression of someone who'd just made a deal she was already planning to break. The first week, the girl didn't speak to him at all. Julian showed up during his afternoon break like he'd agreed. Found her in practice room 3, small windowless space with a piano and 2 chairs. She sat in one chair, arms crossed, face blank. He sat in the other chair, said nothing, just sat. 20 minutes passed. The girl stared at the wall. Julian watched his hands resting on his knees, his long fingers still, patient. The air in the room was stale, smelled like dust and old sheet music. Somewhere in the building, someone was rehearsing scales. The notes drifted through the walls, up and down, mechanical. When the timer on Julian's phone buzzed, he stood, nodded to her, left. The next day, the same, and the day after. The girl testing him, seeing if he'd give up, seeing if he'd try to force conversation or fix her or make demands. Julian did none of those things. He just showed up. Saturday. Sometimes he hummed quietly under his breath, little fragments of melodies, nothing recognizable, just sound to fill the silence. On the 5th day, Rosa passed him in the corridor, the older woman who cleaned the offices. She looked at him with something like concern. You okay, Julian? She asked. You look tired. I'm fine, he said. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. That afternoon, Julian sat in the practice room again. The girl was in her usual spot, staring at nothing. Her hands were trembling slightly. He noticed but didn't comment. 15 minutes in, she spoke. Why are you wasting your time with me? Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in days. Julian looked at her. She was still staring at the wall, not meeting his eyes. Because I remember what it's like to be trapped inside something that used to bring joy, he said quietly. The girl's jaw tightened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked at him for the first time all week. Really looked. Her eyes were dark and searching. What trapped you? She whispered. Julian was quiet. Then he said, Music. Same as you. She held his gaze. Something shifted in her face. The hostility cracked just slightly. My mother thinks you can fix me, she said. I'm not here to fix you. Then why are you here? To sit with you, that's all. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She looked away quickly, wiped at her face with her sleeve. They didn't talk again that day. But when Julian left, she said thank you so quietly he almost didn't hear it. The second week started differently. Julian arrived for his afternoon session and found the girl pacing, back and forth across the small room. Her breath was coming too fast, shallow, panicked. What's wrong? Julian asked. Visiting pianist, coaching session, in an hour. Her voice was breaking. I can't do it. I can't. Her hands went to her arms, started clawing, nails digging into skin. Julian stepped forward, gentle, non-threatening. Hey, look at me. She didn't. Her breathing got faster, worse. The door opened. Two of her regular handlers, young guys in polo shirts who looked uncomfortable. One of them reached for her. Don't, Julian said. The handler stopped. She needs to calm down. We're supposed to. You're making it worse. Give me a minute. They looked uncertain, but they stepped back. Julian knelt in front of the girl, to close enough that she could see him but not touching. His dark brown skin caught the fluorescent light. His voice stayed low, steady. 4 counts in, he said. His own breath slowed deliberately. Hold 4. 4 counts out. He breathed with her, matching his rhythm to hers at first, then gradually slowing, making his exhales audible so she could follow. You're safe. You're not performing. We're just breathing. The girl's hands stopped moving, hovered over her arms, red marks already forming where her nails had been. Julian kept breathing, kept speaking in that same measured rhythm. 4 in, hold. 4 out. That's it. Slowly, so slowly, her breathing started to match his. The panic in her eyes began to clear. She dropped her hands, looked at him like she was seeing something impossible. How did you? She whispered. I learned a long time ago, he said, from someone who knew how to help people when they're breaking. The handlers left quietly. They'd stopped trying to restrain her when they saw it was working. Margot sat down. Her whole body was shaking, but the worst had passed. I'm not going to the coaching session, she said, not defiant, just stating a fact. Okay, Julian said. My mother will be furious. Probably. You're supposed to make me go. That's the whole arrangement. The arrangement is that I sit with you during my breaks. That's what I'm doing. She stared at him. You're really not going to force me? No. Something in her broke then. She started crying, real tears, not the angry sobbing from the stage. This was different, quieter, like relief mixed with grief. Julian sat with her until she stopped. Didn't try to comfort her or make it better. Just stayed. When he got home that evening, Naya was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up when he came in, studied his face. You look different, she said. How? I don't know. Tired, but like a different kind of tired. Julian set down his keys, poured himself water. Just a long day at work, baby. Is something happening at the opera house? Nothing important. Naya's expression said she didn't believe him, but she was 12 years old and she'd learned when to push and when to let things go. After she went to bed, Julian lay awake staring at the ceiling. His mind kept drifting. To the girl, to her panic attack, to the way she'd asked him how he knew how to help. He hadn't thought about it in years. The counselor at the rehab facility. The one who'd taught him breathing techniques when the grief was so bad he couldn't function. After Alessandra. After he'd stopped conducting. After everything fell apart. The memory pulled him back, against his will. He was 29 years old, standing on a podium in Berlin. The Philharmonic spread out before him, his arms moving through the opening measures of La Bohème. Every note perfect, every gesture precise. He glanced toward the wings. Alessandra stood there in her costume, beautiful, radiant. She caught his eye and blew him a kiss, her lips moving in a silent, I love you. Julian's chest tightened. His baton kept moving. The orchestra swelled. Alessandra walked on stage. The audience leaned forward. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The final aria, her signature piece. She began to sing. Her voice filled the hall. De pure, perfect. Heartbreaking. Julian conducted, his whole world in that voice. in those notes, in the way her eyes found his across the stage. Then something changed in her face. Confusion. Fear. She reached for something that wasn't there. Her voice faltered. The note broke. She collapsed. The audience gasped, but they didn't move. They thought it was part of the performance. Mimi dying. The character, not the woman. Julian knew better. He saw it in her eyes, in the way her body went slack. He kept conducting, arms moving on their own, muscle memory. Because stopping would dishonor her, because she'd want the opera finished, because he didn't know what else to do while his wife died in front of him. The memory fractured, shattered. Julian woke in his bed, disoriented. His face was wet. He sat up, breathing hard. The apartment was dark. A quiet except for the sounds of the city outside. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, sat there for a long time. Then he got down on his knees and reached under the bed, pulled out a cardboard box he kept hidden there. He set it on his lap, didn't open it, just rested his hands on the lid. Inside were things he couldn't look at, conducting batons, programs from performances, photos of him in formal dress standing next to a woman with dark hair and a smile that could break your heart. Julian's fingers traced the edge of the box. His hands were shaking. 13 years he'd kept it hidden. 13 years he'd told himself he was over it, that he'd moved on, that being a janitor was enough, that raising Naya alone was healing, but teaching the girl to breathe had pulled something loose. Some piece of himself he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it was there. He pushed the box back under the bed, lay back down, closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he wondered if you could spend so long running from who you were that you forgot how to stop. The third week started with Margot showing up to their session already broken. Julian knew something was wrong the moment she walked into practice room 3. Her movements were loose, uncoordinated. She knocked into the doorframe and didn't seem to notice. "Hey," he said quietly, standing up from his chair. Margot's eyes were unfocused, glassy. Her words came out slurred. "I'm here like you wanted, so we can sit in silence or whatever." She tried to walk to her usual chair, stumbled, caught herself on the piano. Julian's chest tightened. He recognized this, the particular way her body moved, the way her speech dragged. Pills, something strong. He moved closer, kept his voice calm. "Hey, Margot, what did you take?" "Nothing, I'm fine." "You're not fine. Tell me what you took." She laughed, a hollow sound. "Does it matter? Just leave me alone." Her knees buckled. Julian caught her before she hit the floor, lowered her gently into the chair. His mind raced through options. Call for help, medical staff, ambulance, someone who knew what they were doing. But that meant Vivian would know. Margot would be hospitalized again. The fragile trust they'd built would shatter, or handle it himself. Keep her conscious. Walk her through it. Risk that he was wrong about what she'd taken or how much. Risk her life. Margot's head lolled to the side. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Julian made his choice. He knelt in front of her, took her hands in his dark brown skin against her pale fingers. "Margot, hey, look at me." Her eyes tried to focus, failed. "Stay awake. You hear me? Don't close your eyes." "Tired," she mumbled. "I know. But you need to stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me what you took." "My mom's, her pills, the ones that make her sleep." "How many?" Margot's head dropped forward. Julian lifted her chin gently. "How many, Margot?" "4, maybe 5. I don't remember." 4 or 5. Probably not enough to kill her. Probably. But enough to knock her out for hours. Enough to make this dangerous. Julian stood, pulled her up with him. She sagged against him. "We're going to walk," he said. "You and me, through the hallways. You're going to stay on your feet, and you're going to stay awake." "Don't want to." "I know. We're doing it anyway." He got her moving, one arm around her waist, her weight leaning heavily on him. When they left the practice room and started down the service corridor, back and forth, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of floor polish and old wood. Julian talked to keep her conscious, asked questions, made her answer. What's your favorite color? Blue, she slurred. What kind of blue? Ocean blue, dark. Good, what else, huh? Tell me something you like before all this. Her feet dragged. He kept her moving. Hours passed. Julian lost track of how many. His back ached from supporting her weight. His throat was dry from talking. But slowly, so slowly, Margot became more alert. Her eyes cleared. Her words sharpened. By the time his shift ended, she was walking mostly on her own. They sat on the floor in an empty corridor. Margot's back against the wall, her face pale but aware. Why didn't you tell her? She whispered. No, you could have been rid of me. Julian looked at her. This 17-year-old girl who'd been pushed so hard she'd broken in every possible way. Because getting rid of you isn't the goal. Margot's eyes filled with tears. She didn't wipe them away. The fourth week was different. Margot started talking, really talking, not testing him or pushing him away, just opening up. My dad left when I was 6, she said during one session, her voice flat, matter of fact. He couldn't handle my mother, the pressure, the constant need to be perfect. He just disappeared one day. Julian listened, didn't interrupt. She put me at a piano when I was 4, 6 hours a day, every day. No friends, no birthday parties, no anything except practice. When did you realize you hated it? Julian asked quietly. Margot was quiet for a long time. Then she said, and when I was 8, I was playing in a competition and I made a mistake. Just one note. And I looked at my mother's face and I saw nothing, just disappointment. And I thought, if I'm perfect, she'll love me, but I can never be perfect enough. Her voice cracked. And then I thought, what if I just stopped? What if I hated it so much I couldn't do it anymore? Would she notice me then? Julian's chest ached. He knew that logic, the twisted mathematics of being trapped. I understand, he said. Do you? Yeah, I do. Margot looked at him, waiting. Julian chose his words carefully. I used to do something I loved, something that meant everything to me, and then someone I loved died doing it with me, and I couldn't be near it anymore without feeling like I was drowning. What was it? Music. Margot blinked. But you work in an opera house. I know. That doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't. They sat with that for a moment, the honest weight of it. Then Margot did something unexpected. She got up and sat at the piano, looked at Julian. Can I play something that's not Rachmaninoff? Play whatever you want. She started with a pop song, something current, then switched to improvisation, her fingers moving freely across the keys. No pressure, no performance, just sound. Julian listened. For the first time in weeks, Margot was smiling. Outside the practice room, Vivian stood watching through the small window. Her face was unreadable, but her posture was rigid. Over the next few days, Julian noticed things changing. Orchestra members looking at him differently, asking the conductor who he was. The conductor mentioning to someone in passing that he'd never seen anyone manage Margot's volatility so effectively. One afternoon, Vivian appeared in the corridor while Julian was on his way to a session. She didn't speak to him, just watched him walk past, her eyes calculating. At home, Naya came to him with a permission slip. There's a concert at school next month, she said. I'm playing a violin solo. Can you come? Julian looked at his daughter, at the hope in her face. Of course I'll come, he said. Naya beamed, hugged him, went back to her homework. That night, Julian returned for his evening session with Margot. She was already at the piano when he arrived, warming up, running through scales. Then she started playing something he recognized immediately, the opening bars of Musetta's Waltz, from La Bohème, the opera where Alessandra died. Julian's hands gripped the chair, his breath caught. Margot kept playing, watching him, testing. The melody filled the small room, light, playful, the exact piece Alessandra used to hum while cooking dinner. The piece she'd sung 1,000 times. The piece Julian heard in his nightmares. His jaw locked. His vision blurred at the edges. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't let anything show on his face except calm attention. Because Margot was watching, and if he broke, if he showed weakness, if he proved that everyone eventually abandons you when things get hard. She'd never trust anyone again. So Julian sat and listened and felt himself fracture internally while maintaining absolute stillness externally. When Margot finished, she looked at him, really looked, like she could see straight through to what the music had cost him. "That hurt you," she said softly. "Yes." "But you stayed." "Yes." "Why?" Julian met her eyes. "Because you needed to know that people can." Margot's face crumpled. She started crying. Not the violent sobs from before, just quiet tears of someone who'd been carrying something impossible alone for too long. Julian let her cry, waited until she was done. Then they sat in comfortable silence until his break ended. He walked back to his custodial closet, changed back into his work clothes, started his evening tasks. 2 floors above, in an office that overlooked the practice rooms, Vivienne Laurent sat at her desk. A man in an expensive suit stood across from her. He handed her a folder. "You were right to be concerned," he said. His background check raised some flags. So I dug deeper. Vivienne opened the folder, started reading. Her face shifted. Confusion, disbelief, rage. Photos of a younger man on a podium, articles from international music publications, reviews calling him a prodigy, a genius. The first black conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic. The investigator pointed to a name at the top of one article. J. Julian Cross, he said, disappeared 13 years ago after his wife died. No one's heard from him since. Vivienne's hands trembled. Her voice came out cold and sharp. "The janitor. That janitor is J. Julian Cross." The investigator nodded. Vivienne stared at the photo of Julian conducting in formal dress, then at the window, down toward the corridors where he mopped floors. Her expression hardened into something dangerous. "He's been lying to me, deceiving me. Keep playing some kind of game with my daughter." She closed the folder, stood, her mind already calculating her next move. And in that moment, she decided that Julian Cross, whoever he really was going to pay for making a fool out of her. 5 days before the concert, Julian worked his night shift alone in the empty opera house. The floor buffer hummed across the marble lobby. The sound echoed in the silence. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows. Inside, the building felt like a cathedral, dark, vast, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Julian moved mechanically, buffer forward, buffer back. His mind was somewhere else entirely. Naya's words kept replaying. "You've been running your whole life, from mom dying, from music, from being who you really are." She was 12 years old and she'd seen straight through him. Margot was in a psychiatric facility. Critical condition yesterday. Stable now, but refusing to speak to anyone. The concert was in 5 days and there was no pianist, no performer. Just an empty stage and a scandal spreading through San Francisco's arts community. Julian didn't care about the concert. He cared about the girl who'd swallowed pills because the one person she trusted had been publicly destroyed. He cared about his daughter who'd learned her father was a liar. Footsteps echoed across the lobby. High heels on marble. Sharp. Precise. Julian looked up. Vivienne Laurent stood 20 feet away. No assistant, no entourage. Just her. And she looked nothing like the woman who'd commanded rehearsals and humiliated him in front of witnesses. Her hair was loose, uncombed, and her clothes were wrinkled. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Julian turned off the buffer. Waited. Vivienne walked closer, stopped. Her hands were shaking. "I need your help," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Julian said nothing. "The concert is in 5 days. The critics are asking questions. Donors are withdrawing their support. My daughter won't speak to me. She won't speak to anyone." Vivienne's breath hitched. "I don't know what to do." "There's not going to be a concert," Julian said quietly. "There has to be. I've invested everything. My reputation, my foundation, everything I've built." "Your daughter tried to kill herself." Vivienne flinched like he'd slapped her. I know that. But if we can just get through this concert, if she can just perform once, then we can..." "No." The word hung in the air between them. Vivian's face crumpled. Please, I'll pay you anything. Name your price. I'll double it, triple it, whatever you want. Julian looked at this woman who'd called him a janitor with contempt in her voice, who'd accused him in front of his daughter's school, who'd broken her own child trying to build a legacy. Your daughter doesn't need a concert, he said. She needs a mother. Vivian's knees buckled. She caught herself on a marble column, started crying. Real tears. Not elegant, not controlled, just raw grief. I don't know how to be that, she whispered. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Julian set down the buffer handle, walked closer. What are you afraid of? He asked. That without the Laurent legacy, I'm nothing. That I destroyed my daughter for something that doesn't even matter. That I'm exactly the kind of mother I swore I'd never be. Her voice broke completely. She slid down the column until she was sitting on the floor. This billionaire arts patron in expensive clothes sitting on the marble floor of her own opera house crying like a child. Julian sat down across from her, his back against the opposite wall, his dark brown hands resting on his knees. They sat in silence for a long time, just the sound of rain and Vivian's quiet sobbing. Finally, Julian spoke. I had a wife, Alessandra. She was a singer, the best I've ever heard. His voice was soft, steady. She died on stage while I was conducting, and I spent 13 years running from everything that reminded me of her, including music, including myself. Vivian looked up at him, waiting. My daughter told me that running doesn't fix anything. She was right. And your daughter is right too. You can't force her to be something she's not, even if it costs you everything you've built. Then what do I do? You let her go. Vivian shook her head. I can't. The concert is 5 days away, and Margot won't perform. Not for you, not for the critics, not for anyone. Julian paused. Unless you give her a real choice. What kind of choice? Julian took a breath, let it out slow. I'll help Margot through the concert if she chooses to do it freely. No pressure, no expectations, and only under 3 conditions. Vivian sat up straighter. What conditions? First, you sit in the audience. As a mother, not a director. You don't speak to critics. You don't give interviews. You watch your daughter. And that's all. Vivian nodded slowly. Second, after the concert, you commit to actual therapy, real help, for yourself and for your relationship with Margot. And the third? Julian's jaw tightened. His hands gripped his knees. I conduct the concert. Vivian stared at him. You? That's the condition. But you're a... She stopped. You're J. Julian Cross. I read the file. Yeah. You haven't conducted in 13 years. I know. Why would you do this? Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I need to stop running from who I am, and because that girl deserves to have someone show her what it looks like to choose yourself, even when it terrifies you. Vivian wiped her face. If I agree to all of this, if Margot performs, will she be okay? I don't know. But she'll have a better chance than she does now. Vivian looked at him. This man she'd humiliated and threatened and tried to destroy. This man offering to save her daughter and her legacy when he owed her nothing. Okay, she whispered. I agree. The next morning, Julian drove to the psychiatric facility where Margot was being held. The building was clean and modern. Lots of windows, soft lighting, nothing like the cold institutions from movies. A nurse led him to Margot's room. She was sitting up in bed, pale, thin, dark circles under her eyes, but conscious, present. Julian sat in the chair beside her bed. Didn't speak, just sat. After a long silence, Margot said, My mother told me what she did, at your daughter's school. I know. I'm sorry. You didn't do it. I'm still sorry. Julian nodded, where Margot picked at the hospital blanket. The nurse said you want to talk about the concert. Only if you want to. I don't want to perform. Okay. Margot looked up, surprised. Okay? Yeah, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But the concert is in 5 days. I know. And if you choose not to perform, that's fine. We'll cancel it. Your mother will survive. The opera house will survive. You'll survive. Margot's eyes filled with tears. You mean that? I do. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, what if I wanted to try? Not for my mother, not for the critics, just for me, to see if I can do it without falling apart. Julian leaned forward slightly. Then we'd make sure you have a real choice, every step. You can start and stop whenever you want. You can walk away in the middle if you need to. When and nobody will judge you for it. Who would conduct? Julian's hands tightened on the chair arms. Me. Margot stared at him. But you don't conduct anymore. I don't. I haven't. Not since my wife died. Why would you do it now? Julian met her eyes. Because you taught me that the only way out is through, and I need to stop running from who I am. Margot's face crumpled. She started crying. I'm scared. I know. Me too. What if I mess up? Then you mess up. It's not the end of the world. What if I can't do it? Then you can't. And that's okay too. Margot wiped her face, took a shaky breath. Okay, I'll try. 3 days later, Julian stood alone in the empty Bellamy Opera House Theater. Middle of the night, just him and the stage and the silence. He'd come here after his shift, told himself he was just checking on something, but he knew the truth. He walked onto the stage. The wood creaked under his feet. The darkness pressed in from all sides. The empty seats stretched out before him like an ocean. Julian reached into his pocket, pulled out something he'd retrieved from the box under his bed. A conductor's baton, worn, familiar, the one he'd used in Berlin, the one he'd been holding when Alessandra died. His hand trembled as he gripped it. His breath came shallow and fast. He raised his arm, held the baton like he used to, like he'd done thousands of times before, and his entire body started shaking so violently he thought he might collapse. The Bellamy Opera House was full, every seat taken. The lights blazed down on the stage where a white grand piano waited under the crystal chandelier. Julian stood backstage in a borrowed tuxedo. The fabric felt strange against his skin, too formal, too familiar. He hadn't worn clothes like this in 13 years. His hands were shaking, had been shaking since he'd put on the jacket an hour ago. Margot stood beside him in a simple black dress. Her face was pale. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her, but she was here. Present, breathing. You can still change your mind, Julian said quietly. So can you. He almost smiled. Yeah. The stage manager gave them the signal. 2 minutes. Julian walked onto the stage first. The audience noise died. He felt hundreds of eyes on him as he crossed to the podium. His dark brown skin gleamed under the lights. His silver-streaked locks were tied back neatly. His long fingers gripped the conductor's baton. He stepped onto the podium, raised his arms. The orchestra looked at him, waiting. Julian took a breath. Let it out slow. Then he brought the baton down. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto filled the hall. Rich, powerful. The orchestra followed his gestures with a precision that came from recognizing real authority. This was not a janitor playing conductor. This was mastery. Margot walked onto the stage, sat at the piano. Her hands found the keys, and she began to play. The first movement was beautiful. Margot's fingers moved across the keys with technical perfection, but also something else, something she'd never had before. Joy, freedom, the knowledge that she could stop whenever she wanted. Julian conducted. His arms moved through the familiar patterns. After 13 years, his body remembered. The orchestra responded like an extension of his own breath. In the audience, Naya sat 3 rows back, watching her father become someone she'd never seen before. Her eyes were wide, wet with tears. Vivian sat alone in the front row, not with donors or assistants, just her, a mother watching her daughter. Her hands gripped the armrest, but her face was open, vulnerable. The first movement ended. Brief pause, scattered applause. The second movement began. Halfway through, Julian saw Margot's hands start to shake, just slightly. The notes became uneven, less sure. He knew that tremor, had seen it before, the panic creeping back in. Julian slowed the tempo, gave her space, made the music wait for her instead of forcing her to chase it. Margot pushed through another page. Her breathing got faster, shallower. Then her hands stopped moving, hovered over the keys, frozen. And the orchestra kept playing for 2 more measures before trailing off into silence. The audience shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, confused. Critics leaned forward, pens ready. Vivian's knuckles went white. Julian lowered his baton, set it down on the podium, walked across the stage to the piano. He knelt beside Margot so only she could hear. "Do you want to continue?" he asked softly. Tears streamed down Margot's face. "I can't. I'm sorry. I can't do this." Julian spoke loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Then don't. You've already done the impossible. You chose to be here. That's enough." Margot looked at him, disbelief in her eyes. "But everyone's watching. The concert isn't more important than you." Julian's voice was steady, calm. "Would you like to leave? Or would you like to stay and listen?" Margot's breath caught. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her a real choice. No pressure, no expectations, just genuine freedom to decide. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want to hear how it ends." Julian stood, walked back to the podium, picked up his baton. He looked out at the audience. Hundreds of faces staring back at him, waiting, judging. Julian spoke clearly. His voice carried through the silent hall. "Ms. Laurent will not be finishing her performance tonight. She's making a choice to honor her own well-being over our expectations. I hope you'll respect that decision. We will continue." A ripple ran through the audience. Shock, outrage, confusion. But Julian had already turned back to the orchestra, raised his baton, and began conducting the remainder of the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto without piano. He reimagined it in real time, redistributed the piano's voice across the strings, gave the melody to the violins, the harmonies to the cellos, the bass notes to the violas and bass. It was improvisation of breathtaking skill, the kind that only comes from knowing a piece so deeply that you can tear it apart and rebuild it into something new. The orchestra followed, trusting him, believing him, and slowly, so slowly, the audience stopped rustling, stopped whispering. They leaned forward, listening. The music filled the hall, different from what they'd expected, but beautiful, a demonstration that music could adapt, could survive loss, could find new form even when the centerpiece was missing. Margot sat at the piano bench, not performing, just listening, when truly hearing music for the first time in years. The pressure gone, the expectation lifted, just sound and beauty and freedom. 3 rows back, Naya watched her father conduct, saw him become fully himself for the first time in her entire life. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. In the front row, an elderly woman leaned toward her neighbor. She had gray hair and sharp eyes, and she'd been reviewing classical music for 50 years. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried. "That's J. Julian Cross. The Julian Cross. He's alive." The whisper spread, row to row, seat to seat. People pulled out their phones, searched, found photos from 13 years ago. A young black conductor on a podium in Berlin. The same precise gestures, the same elegant hands. By the time the final note faded into silence, everyone in the Bellamy Opera House knew the janitor was a legend. The applause started slowly. 1 person, then 2, then a wave. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous, standing, roaring. But it wasn't for Margot's performance. It was for Julian's impossible return. And for a 17-year-old girl who'd chosen herself over everyone's expectations and survived. Julian lowered his baton, turned to the audience, took a bow. His eyes scanned the crowd, found Naya. She was standing, crying, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Their eyes met across the distance, and Julian saw in his daughter's face not confusion or anger or shame, just pride, pure and uncomplicated and real. He'd spent 13 years running from who he was. Tonight, he'd finally stopped. And the person who mattered most was still there, still standing. It's still believing in him. Julian smiled. A real smile. The first one in longer than he could remember. And in that moment, surrounded by applause and light and music, he finally understood what Alessandra would have wanted all along. Not for him to stop, not for him to hide, not for him to pretend he was less than he was, but to heal, to grow, to carry her memory forward into new life, instead of burying it in silence. The applause continued. Julian bowed again, gestured to the orchestra, to Margot still sitting at the piano. And somewhere in the sound and the light and the impossible joy of it all, he felt something shift. The weight he'd carried for 13 years didn't disappear, but it changed, became something he could hold without being crushed by it, something he could finally learn to live with. 3 months after the concert, Vivienne Laurent sat in a therapist's office in Pacific Heights. The room was quiet, comfortable, nothing like the grand spaces she was used to commanding. "Tell me about this week," the therapist said. Vivienne looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly. They did that now, ever since she'd stopped pretending she had everything under control. "Margot and I had dinner. Just the two of us. No handlers, no schedules." Her voice was soft, different from the imperious tone she'd used for so many years. "She told me about a piece she's been working on, for herself, not for a concert, just because she wanted to." "How did that make you feel?" Vivienne's eyes filled with tears. "Terrified, because I realized I don't know my daughter at all. I know the pianist I tried to create, but the actual person." She stopped, took a breath. "And I'm trying to learn who she is." The therapist nodded. "That's good work, Vivienne. Real work." 2 weeks later, Vivienne stepped down from the Bellamy Opera House board. She issued a statement about spending more time with family. Then she did something she'd never done before. She wrote a check for $2 million to fund a mental health program for young musicians. No naming rights, no gala. Just quiet support for kids who were breaking under the same pressure she'd put on her own daughter. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. In a small studio in the Mission District, Margot sat at an old upright piano. The room smelled like coffee from the cafe downstairs. The walls were painted a warm yellow. Natural light came through tall windows. She played. Not Rachmaninoff. Not anything from the conservatory repertoire. Had just a simple melody she'd written herself. Imperfect. Honest. Hers. Her therapist sat in the corner, listening, not judging. "How does it feel?" the therapist asked when Margot finished. Margot looked at her hands on the keys. "Like I'm learning what music is supposed to be. Not a weapon, not a performance, just sound." "Do you miss performing?" "No." Margot's answer was immediate. Then she reconsidered. "Maybe someday if I want to, but right now I'm just trying to remember what it's like to play because I want to, not because someone's watching." She and her mother had sessions together now, twice a week, difficult sessions where they talked about everything that had been broken between them. Vivienne apologized, over and over, for the pressure, for the expectations, for making Margot's worth conditional on her talent. Margot was learning to accept the apologies, and to set boundaries, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, her mother could change. It was slow, painful, but it was real. At the Bellamy Opera House, Julian stood on the podium during his first rehearsal as associate conductor. The orchestra looked at him with respect now. No one saw a janitor. They saw J. Julian Cross, the legend who'd come back. His hands shook less than they had during the concert, but they still shook. He raised his baton, started conducting. The music filled the hall. After years of running from it, he was learning to live inside it again. The grief was still there. Every note reminded him of Alessandra. But the pain was different now, less crushing, more like carrying something precious that also weighed him down. He could bear it. 6 months after Margot's concert, Sir Julian conducted his first full program. The finale was the last act of La Bohème, the opera where Alessandra had died. Naya sat in the front row, 13 now, growing up. She wore a nice dress and her hair was done in 2 French braids. She watched her father with pride and understanding and a maturity that made Julian's chest ache. When the final note faded and the applause began, Julian found her eyes across the distance. She was crying, but she was smiling too. After the concert, she ran to him backstage, hugged him tight. "You were amazing, Dad." "Thanks, baby. I'm proud of you." Julian held his daughter and felt something break open inside him. Something that had been locked tight for 13 years. Permission to be proud of himself. Permission to step back into the light. Julian started a fellowship program. Full funding for young conductors of color. Kids who looked like him. Who would face the same barriers he'd faced. He couldn't change the past. But he could open doors that had been closed. He and Naya moved to a better apartment. Still in the Fillmore. Still above a restaurant. But bigger. Brighter. With space for both of them to grow. They kept the same connections. The same community. Marcus still gave them free meals when money was tight. Naya still went to the same school. Julian still walked the same streets. But everything was different. Because he was different. On a warm evening in early spring, Julian and Naya visited the Bellamy Opera House garden. It was a small green space behind the building. Trees and flowers. Stone benches. A fountain. In the center was a memorial. Simple. Elegant. A bronze plaque with a name and 2 dates. Alessandra Moretti Cross, 1983 to 2014. De Vivienne had funded it. An apology in bronze and stone. Julian and Naya sat on the bench beside it. The evening light filtered through the trees. Golden. Soft. The sound of water from the fountain mixed with distant traffic. From inside the opera house came the faint sound of someone rehearsing. Scales. Up and down. The simple foundation of all music. "Dad," Naya said quietly. "Yeah? Are you happy?" Julian considered the question. Really considered it. A year ago, he would have deflected, changed the subject, pretended he didn't understand what she was asking. Now he sat with it, thought about it honestly. "I'm learning how to be," he said finally. "Your mom would say that's the only kind of happy that matters, the kind you have to practice." Naya leaned against him. Julian put his arm around her shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence. Father and daughter, both of them carrying loss, both of them learning to carry it forward instead of being crushed by it. The music from inside continued, someone working through the same passage over and over, getting it wrong, trying again. The patient repetition of someone learning. Julian listened without pain for the first time in 13 years. The grief was still there. The memory of Alessandra still sharp, but it no longer felt like drowning. It felt like remembering, which was different, bearable, even beautiful in its own way. After a while they stood, walked back through the garden toward the street. The Fillmore district stretched out before them. Their neighborhood, their home, lights coming on in windows, people heading home from work, the smell of cooking from the restaurants, music from open doors. Julian's hand rested on Naya's shoulder as they walked. His daughter, his reason for surviving, the person who'd forced him to stop running and face who he really was. "I love you, baby," he said. "I love you too, Dad." They walked home together through the gathering dusk. Two people who'd learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying loss forward. It means practicing happiness like you practice music. Every day, one note at a time, until the broken places inside you become the foundation for something new. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, even shattered instruments can learn to sing again.